The year was 2157, and Earth was struggling. The global economy had barely recovered from a series of resource wars. Nations still argued over water rights and farmland. Billions of people lived in poverty, and the governments of the world could barely keep their own citizens fed and safe. It was not a good time for surprises. But the universe did not care about human timing. The ship appeared without warning in the skies above the Pacific Ocean. It was massive, almost 2 kilometers long, but it moved slowly and carefully, like a wounded animal looking for shelter. Within hours, every military force on Earth had scrambled jets and aimed weapons at the strange vessel. Samuel was a young diplomat working at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva. He was 32 years old, idealistic, and known for speaking his mind even when it got him in trouble. When the first images of the alien ship appeared on the news screens in his office, he felt his heart stop. First contact, humanity was no longer alone. The aliens made contact within 6 hours. They called themselves and their message was translated through a basic mathematical communication system that took human linguists several days to decode. When they finally understood what they were saying, the message was not what anyone expected. They were not conquerors, they were not explorers, they were refugees. They had been destroyed by their own sun going unstable. They had fled in this single ship, the last of their kind. There were only 7,832 left alive in the entire universe. They had traveled for decades through empty space, hopping to find any planet that could support life. They were starving. They were dying. They had nothing left. They were asking humanity for help. The debates in the United Nations lasted for weeks. Representatives from every nation shouted at each other across the assembly hall. Some argued that humanity had a moral duty to help any intelligent species in need. Others pointed out that Earth could barely support its own population. How could they take on thousands of alien mouths to feed? They waited in their dying ship. Every day more of them died from starvation and disease. Their ambassador, a tall blue-skinned being named, sent daily messages pleading for any assistance. He did not demand. He did not threaten. He simply asked with quiet dignity for mercy. Samuel watched the debates from the visitors' gallery. He had no official role in the decision. He was too junior, too unimportant. But he could not stop thinking about He could not stop imagining what it would feel like to be the last survivors of your entire world, floating in space, watching your people die one by one while strangers argued about whether you were worth saving. On the 23rd day of debates, Samuel did something that would change history. He walked into the assembly hall during a recess, approached the podium, and began to speak. Security guards moved toward him, but several delegates waved them back, curious about what this young man had to say. Samuel's voice shook as he spoke, but his words were clear. "I know I am not supposed to be here," he said. "I know I have no authority to address this assembly, but I cannot stay silent anymore. I have listened to these debates for weeks. I have heard every argument about resources and economics and political consequences, and I understand those concerns. They are valid." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of the most powerful people on Earth. "But I want to ask you all a question, not as diplomats or politicians, as human beings. If we turn away a dying species because helping them is inconvenient, what does that make us? What does that say about who we are?" The room was silent. "We have always believed that humanity is special," Samuel continued. "We have always told ourselves stories about our compassion, our courage, our capacity for good. But those are just stories until we prove them. Right now, right here, we have a chance to prove that humanity is worth something, that we are more than just another species fighting for survival." He took a deep breath. "They have nothing to offer us. No technology, no resources, no political power. Helping them will cost us. It will be hard. Some people will suffer because of it, but if we turn them away, we will have defined ourselves forever. We will have proven that human compassion has a price tag, that our mercy is conditional. Samuel's voice grew stronger. 300 years from now, no one will remember the economic projections or the political calculations, but they will remember this choice. They will remember whether humanity chose kindness when it was difficult or cruelty when it was easy. I am asking you, all of you, to choose kindness, to be the species we have always claimed to be. He stepped back from the podium. The security guards finally reached him and escorted him out of the hall. He expected to be arrested, fired, maybe even imprisoned for his unauthorized speech. Instead, something remarkable happened. The vote was held the next day. By a margin of just 7 votes, the United Nations agreed to grant the sanctuary on Earth. The years that followed were not easy. They were given a chain of small islands in the South Pacific, far from major population centers. Human volunteers helped them build shelters, grow food, and adapt to their new home. There were problems. Cultural misunderstandings led to conflicts. Some humans resented the resources being spent on aliens while their own families struggled. Protests erupted in several countries. But slowly, things improved. They learned human languages. They shared their art and music and philosophy. They proved to be gentle, thoughtful beings who valued knowledge and beauty above all else. Friendships formed between humans and children grew up playing together on those Pacific islands, not caring that their playmates had blue skin and silver eyes. Samuel became famous for his speech. He spent the rest of his career working on human relations, helping the two species understand each other. He died at the age of 78, beloved by both humans and never knowing the true consequences of what he had started. Because they remembered. They remembered every human who had shared food with them when they were starving. They remembered every doctor who had treated their sick. They remembered every family that had welcomed them into their homes. And most of all, they remembered Samuel, the young man who had risked everything to speak for strangers he had never met. They were a patient species. They thought in centuries, not years, and they had decided in those early desperate days that they would find a way to repay humanity's kindness, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. They would not forget. And 300 years later, when humanity faced extinction, the galaxy would learn what gratitude truly meant. 300 years had passed since humanity first welcomed the refugees. Earth had changed beyond recognition. Humans had spread across the stars, colonizing dozens of worlds in nearby systems. The old nations had united into the Earth Union, and humanity had become a minor but growing power in galactic civilization. They had long since left Earth, establishing their own colony world called New, where their population had slowly recovered to several million. Commander Lisa stood on the bridge of the carrier enduring hope, watching the stars through the main. She was 43 years old, a veteran of 15 years in the Earth Defense Coalition. Her ship was one of humanity's finest, carrying a crew of 2,000 sailors and enough firepower to level a small moon. But today, Lisa felt afraid. "Commander," her tactical officer Daniel called out from his station. "Long-range sensors are picking up multiple contacts entering the system, hundreds of them." Lisa's stomach tightened. Identification. Daniel's face went pale as he read his screens. "Warships, Commander. A full battle fleet." The bridge fell silent. Every officer knew what that meant. The Dominion was one of the oldest and most feared powers in the galaxy. They were a species of warriors who believed that strength was the only virtue worth having. For thousands of years, they had conquered and enslaved any civilization too weak to resist them. They had destroyed entire species for the crime of being in their way. Humanity had worked hard to stay beneath the notice. Their diplomats had been careful, their expansion slow and quiet. They had hoped that by the time they turned their attention toward human space, Earth would be strong enough to defend itself. That hope had just died. "How many ships?" Lisa asked quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. Over 600 warships, Commander, including 12 planet killers. Planet killers. Ships designed specifically to crack worlds open like eggs. Lisa had seen images of what they could do. Entire civilizations reduced to asteroid fields. "Get me Central Command," she ordered. The face of Admiral Vance appeared on the screen moments later. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the past hour. "Commander, I assume you've seen the sensor data." "Yes, Admiral, what are our orders?" His voice was steady, but Lisa could hear the despair beneath it. "They have already attacked the frontier. 6 colony worlds have gone dark. We're estimating casualties in the hundreds of thousands, possibly millions." Lisa closed her eyes. The frontier was home to 12 human colonies, nearly 50 million people. "We're mobilizing everything we have," continued. "Every ship, every fighter, every armed transport. We're going to meet them at the system and try to buy time for civilian evacuation." "What are our chances, Admiral?" The pause was answer enough. "We're outnumbered 4-1 and their technology is superior to ours. Realistically, we can slow them down, maybe save some of the civilian transports, but stopping them," shook her head. "We'd need a miracle." Lisa nodded slowly. "Understood, Admiral. The enduring hope will be ready." "Good luck, Commander, to all of us." The screen went dark. Lisa turned to face her bridge crew. She saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. These were good people. They had families waiting for them back home. They had futures they wanted to live. But they also understood what was at stake. "You all heard the Admiral," Lisa said. "This is going to be bad. I'm not going to lie to you, but we're going to fight anyway. We're going to fight because that's who we are. Because somewhere behind us, there are children on evacuation ships who need time to get away. Because humanity doesn't give up." She straightened her shoulders. "Set course for the system, maximum speed." The journey took 18 hours. Lisa spent most of it walking through her ship, talking to her crew, making sure they were ready. She visited the engine room, where Chief Engineer and his team were squeezing every bit of power from the reactors. She stopped by the medical bay, where Dr. Christina Flores was preparing for the casualties they all knew were coming. She ate dinner with the fighter pilots, young men and women who would be first into the battle and least likely to survive it. When they finally arrived the battle had already begun. The space around the fourth planet was filled with fire and death. Human ships were scattered across thousands of kilometers, fighting desperately against a fleet that seemed endless. Lisa watched as the cruiser Defiant was torn apart by concentrated fire. She saw the destroyer Swift Hope ram a battleship in a suicide attack that destroyed both vessels. She heard the screams of dying sailors over the communication channels. "All ships, this is Commander of the Enduring Hope. We're entering the fight. Form up on my position." The battle lasted for 6 hours. 6 hours of chaos and terror and death. Lisa lost count of how many times her ship was hit, how many damage reports flooded her screens, how many friends she watched die in the flashes of exploding vessels. By the end, humanity had lost 2/3 of its fleet. They had lost perhaps 100 ships, barely a dent in their armada. "Commander," Daniel said, his voice cracking, "the enemy flagship is moving toward us. We can't run. Our engines are too damaged." Lisa looked at her remaining crew, so few left, so young. "Then we stand our ground," she said. "We fight until we can't fight anymore." But before the flagship could reach them, something impossible happened. "Commander," her communications officer whispered, "we're being hailed, not from somewhere else." Lisa frowned. "Source?" "Unknown. The signal is coming from outside the combat zone. They're asking to speak with humanity's leader." With nothing left to lose, Lisa accepted the transmission. A face appeared on screen, blue skin, silver eyes. "I am High Speaker," the alien said. "I address the children of Earth who saved my people 3 centuries ago." Lisa stared at the screen. She knew about them, of course. Everyone did. But they were a peaceful species, artists and philosophers, not warriors. What could they possibly do here? "High Speaker," she managed. "I don't understand. Why are you contacting us now?" Smiled gently. "Because humanity gave us life when we had nothing. Because you showed us mercy when it cost you something. Because for 300 years we have been preparing to return that favor." The tactical display flickered. New contacts were appearing at the edge of the system. Thousands of them. Lisa stared at her tactical display, unable to believe what she was seeing. Ships were pouring into the system from multiple directions. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. The sensor computers were struggling to count them all, their identification systems overwhelmed by the variety of vessel types appearing on screen. "Commander," Daniel said slowly, "those aren't ships. The computer is identifying heavy cruisers, Meridian, dreadnoughts, strike wings, destroyers." He looked up at her with wide eyes. "That's half the neutral powers in the quadrant. What are they doing here?" On the High Speaker continued speaking. His voice was calm and gentle, but his words carried the weight of centuries. "When your people saved us, we had nothing to give in return. We were dying refugees with no power, no wealth, no influence. But we had time, and we had a story worth telling." Lisa watched as the Allied fleet began to move into attack formation. The ships were beautiful and terrifying, designs she had never seen before, weapons systems her computers could not even classify. "For 300 years," said, "they have traveled across the galaxy. We have traded with 100 species, shared our art and music with 1,000 worlds. And everywhere we went, we told them about humanity. We told them about the young species that saved us when they had nothing to gain. We told them about Samuel and his speech before the United Nations. We told them that somewhere in the galaxy there was a species worth knowing." The fleet had stopped advancing. Even from a distance, Lisa could see their formation shifting, trying to respond to the new threat appearing behind them. "Many species listened," continued. "Some became curious about humanity. Others were moved by our story. A few decided that they wanted to meet the people who had shown such kindness to strangers, and so we introduced them. We arranged meetings between human traders and merchants. We brought human artists to perform for Meridian audiences. We shared human philosophy with scholars." Lisa finally understood. They had spent 3 centuries building relationships on humanity's behalf. They had used their reputation as peaceful wanderers to become ambassadors for a species they owed their lives to. Over the years, said, those connections grew. The species who met humans found that our story was true. Humanity was kind. Humanity was worth knowing. And when we sent word that humanity faced destruction, they answered. The Allied fleet opened fire. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his carefully planned invasion fall apart. He had studied humanity for years. He knew their fleet strength, their colony locations, their defensive capabilities. His intelligence officers had assured him that no other major power would intervene. Humans were isolated, alone, vulnerable. They had been wrong. "How is this possible?" demanded. "They are merchants. They don't fight wars. The Meridian haven't used their military in 400 years. They never involved themselves in other species conflicts." His tactical officer had no answers. The screens showed ships dying by the dozens as the Allied fleet tore through their formation. Cruisers moved with surprising coordination, their weapons far more powerful than intelligence had suggested. Meridian carriers deployed fighters that seemed to appear from nowhere, swarming vessels like angry insects. And the dreadnoughts, ancient ships from an ancient species, unleashed weapons that ripped through shields like they were made of paper. "Fall back to defensive positions," ordered. "Protect the planet killers." But the Allies knew exactly what they were doing. Their attack was precise, surgical, targeting the most dangerous weapons with terrifying accuracy. One by one, the planet killers exploded, their massive hulls torn open by coordinated strikes. On the enduring hope, Lisa watched the battle unfold with tears streaming down her face. Her crew had been ready to die. They had accepted their fate, prepared themselves to sell their lives as dearly as possible. And now, against all odds, they were being saved. "Commander," said quietly, "we're receiving transmissions from the Allied fleet. They want to coordinate with us." Lisa wiped her eyes and straightened her uniform. There would be time for emotions later. Right now, she had work to do. "Open channels to all Allied vessels, and get me a direct line to High Speaker." The leader's face appeared on screen again. This time, Lisa could see the emotion in his silver eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "I don't have words for what you've done." Shook his head gently. "There is no debt between us, Commander. Humanity gave my people everything when you had nothing to gain. We have simply tried to do the same." "But how did you convince them? These species barely knew we existed. Why would they risk their ships, their soldiers, for strangers?" "Because kindness is rare in this galaxy," said. "Most species are selfish. They help others only when it benefits them. They calculate costs and rewards before every decision. But humanity helped us without calculation. You saved us simply because it was right." The paused. "That kind of compassion is precious. It deserves to be protected. The species who came today understand that. They came not because they owed humanity anything, but because they believe the galaxy needs more species like yours." The battle continued for another 3 hours. They fought desperately, but they were now the ones outnumbered and Admiral tried to retreat, but the Allied fleet had cut off his escape routes. One by one, his ships were destroyed or captured. Finally, as his flagship was surrounded by enemy vessels, accepted the inevitable. "This is Admiral of the Dominion. We surrender." A cheer erupted across every human ship in the system. Sailors hugged each other, crying and laughing at the same time. On the enduring hope, Lisa sat down heavily in her command chair, suddenly exhausted. They had survived. Against all odds, humanity had survived. But Lisa knew this was not just a military victory. Something much larger had happened today. The galaxy had seen a dozen species unite to protect a single world. They had seen ancient enemies and cautious neutrals fight side by side. They had seen what was possible when compassion was valued above power. They had wanted to make an example of humanity. They had wanted to show the galaxy what happened to weak species who grew too quickly. Instead, the galaxy had made an example of them, and the lesson was one that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Mercy was not weakness, kindness was not foolishness, and humanity would never stand alone again. The weeks following the Battle of Frontier were unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. News of the victory spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every species, every world, every civilization heard the story. A young species called humanity had faced extinction at the hands of the Dominion, and instead of dying alone, they had been saved by a coalition of allies they had never even met. The story did not end there. As reporters and historians dug deeper, they discovered the truth about why those allies had come. They learned about the refugees 300 years ago. They learned about Samuel and his speech. They learned about the decades of quiet friendship building that they had done on humanity's behalf. It was, many said, the greatest story of the age. Lisa found herself at the center of it all. She had been promoted to admiral after the battle, given command of humanity's rebuilt fleet. But more importantly, she had been appointed as Earth's chief diplomatic liaison to the newly formed coalition of allied species. "I'm a soldier," she told Secretary General during their first meeting after the promotion. "I know how to fight. I don't know anything about diplomacy." Was a large man with a gentle face and calm eyes. He had led the Earth Union through the crisis with steady hands, and now he smiled at Lisa's protest. "Admiral, you spent the worst day of humanity's existence coordinating with alien species you'd never met before. You made friends with the the meridian, and the while your ship was falling apart around you. If that's not diplomacy, I don't know what is. And so Lisa began her new career. The coalition grew faster than anyone expected. Species that had watched the battle from afar now came forward, wanting to be part of what was happening. Trade delegations arrived on Earth daily. Cultural exchange programs were established. Scientific partnerships formed between human universities and alien research institutes. Lisa spent her days in meetings with beings she had only read about in intelligence reports. They were tall, thin creatures covered in fine scales, obsessed with commerce and contracts. They had come to the battle because their merchants had done profitable business with humans for decades, and they understood that protecting good trading partners was simply good business sense. "Your species is reliable," Trade Master told Lisa over a meal of imported Earth food. He had developed a surprising taste for pasta. "You pay your debts, you honor your agreements. That would have destroyed a valuable economic partner. We could not allow that." The Meridian were different. They were small, delicate beings with wings like butterflies and voices like singing crystal. They had not fought a war in 4 centuries, preferring to focus on art and beauty. But when they had called for help, they had remembered their own history. "Long ago," Admiral of the Meridian Collective explained, "my people were refugees too. We fled a dying world and begged for shelter among strangers. Some species turned us away, others helped. We never forgot which was which." She tilted her elegant head. "When we learned what humanity did for we recognized something familiar. We saw ourselves in your kindness." They were perhaps the most surprising allies. They were ancient, their civilization older than most stars. They rarely involved themselves in the affairs of younger species, preferring to observe from their distant worlds. But General had brought their dreadnoughts to the battle personally. "We have watched countless species rise and fall," rumbled during one of his conversations with Lisa. His voice was deep as an earthquake, his body massive and gray like living stone. "Most of them followed predictable patterns. They grew strong, then cruel, then self-destructive. But occasionally, very occasionally, we see something different." He fixed Lisa with eyes that had witnessed millions of years of history. "Humanity chose to help the helpless when it cost you something. That is rare. That is precious. The galaxy needs more species capable of such choices. We came to make sure you survived long enough to teach others what you know." Lisa thought about his words often in the months that followed. She thought about Samuel, the young diplomat who had risked everything to speak for strangers. She thought about the patient and grateful, spending 3 centuries building friendships in humanity's name. She thought about all the choices, large and small, that had led to this moment. The coalition continued to expand. New species joined every month, drawn by the story of what had happened at Frontier. They wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves, something built on cooperation rather than conquest. And humanity found itself transformed. Before the battle, humans had been a minor power, cautious and afraid, constantly looking over their shoulders for predators. Now they were at the heart of the largest alliance in galactic history. Human diplomats were respected everywhere. Human traders were welcomed on 1,000 worlds. Human culture, art, music, and ideas spread across the stars. But with that influence came responsibility. "We can't just take," Lisa told her staff during one of their planning meetings. "They didn't spend 3 centuries helping us so that we could become another selfish empire. We have to give back. We have to prove that their faith in us was justified." And so humanity began to do for others what they had done for them. They reached out to isolated species, offering friendship without expectation of reward. They shared their technology with developing worlds. They defended weak civilizations against aggressive neighbors. The Dominion, humiliated and weakened, retreated to their core territories. For the first time in their long history, they had learned that there were limits to what strength alone could achieve. Some of their leaders began to wonder if perhaps there was another way to live. And on the rebuilt colony worlds of the frontier, memorials were raised to those who had died in the battle. Beside the names of human sailors and soldiers were the names of merchants, meridian pilots, warriors, and dozens of other species who had given their lives to protect strangers. At the center of each memorial, in letters of gold, were words that Samuel had spoken 300 years ago. Let us be remembered as the species that chose kindness when it was difficult. Humanity had chosen, and the galaxy would remember. 50 years had passed since the Battle of Frontier. The galaxy was a different place now. The coalition of allied species had grown to include over 200 civilizations, making it the largest and most powerful organization in known space. Wars had become rare. Trade flourished across thousands of star systems. Species that had once been enemies now worked together on projects that would have seemed impossible a century before. And at the heart of it all was Earth. Lisa sat in the garden of her home on the Pacific coast, watching the sun set over the ocean. She was 93 years old now, her hair white and her face lined with age, but her eyes were still sharp. She had retired from active service 20 years ago, but she still followed the news from across the galaxy. She still cared. Her granddaughter sat beside her on the old wooden bench. Was 25, recently graduated from the Diplomatic Academy, about to begin her first assignment as a junior liaison to the Coalition Council. She was young and eager and full of questions. "Tell me about Samuel again," Grandma said. Lisa smiled. It was a story she had told many times, but she never tired of it. "He was just a young man," she began. "Nobody important, nobody powerful. He had no authority to speak before the United Nations, but he saw something happening that was wrong and he couldn't stay silent." She gazed out at the ocean. Somewhere out there, beneath the waves, were the islands where the refugees had first made their home on Earth. The islands were a museum now, preserved as a memorial to that first act of kindness. "Everyone said it was impossible," Lisa continued. "They said Earth couldn't afford to help aliens when humans were still struggling. They said it was foolish to waste resources on strangers. But Samuel believed that kindness was never wasted. He believed that mercy was not weakness." Was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you think he knew, when he gave that speech? Do you think he had any idea what it would lead to?" Lisa shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think he could have imagined this. None of us could. He just did what he thought was right without expecting anything in return." She reached out and took her granddaughter's hand. "That's the important part. He wasn't trying to build an empire or gain influence or make humanity powerful. He just saw beings in need and believed they deserved help. Everything that came after, the coalition, the alliance, the protection of all those species, it all happened because one person chose to be kind without calculation." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Out there, among those points of light, were hundreds of worlds filled with beings who had come to see humanity as friends. "The ambassador is coming to Earth next week," said eventually. "High Speaker's grandson. He wants to visit the Memorial Islands." "I know," Lisa said. "I'm planning to meet with him." "Really? I thought you were retired." Lisa chuckled. "I am, but some relationships are too important to leave to others. They saved us. They gave 3 centuries of their existence to building the friendships that protected humanity. I owe them more than I can ever repay." Nodded slowly. "What do we do with that, with everything they've given us?" It was the same question Lisa had asked herself many times over the years, and she had found an answer. "We pass it on," she said. "We find the next desperate species, the next refugees, the next people who need help and have nothing to offer in return, and we help them anyway." She turned to look at her granddaughter directly. "That's your job now, you and your generation. You have to carry on what Samuel started, not because you'll be rewarded for it, not because it will make humanity stronger or richer or more powerful, but because it's right, because kindness matters, because the galaxy needs species who believe that mercy is worth choosing. His eyes were bright, and maybe someday they do the same for someone else. Exactly. Lisa squeezed her granddaughter's hand. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. Kindness isn't a transaction. It's a chain. Each link connects to the next, stretching forward into a future none of us will live to see. The stars grew brighter as the last light faded from the sky. Lisa could name the systems where human colonies thrived. She could point to the distant gleams that marked space, trading posts, meridian art worlds, observation stations. All of them connected now. All of them part of something larger than any single species could have built alone. "They are changing, you know," said quietly. "I read a report last week. They've started diplomatic outreach programs. Some of their younger leaders are talking about joining the coalition." Lisa nodded. She had heard the same reports. It seemed impossible, but then everything about the past 50 years had seemed impossible. "That's the other lesson," she said. "Kindness doesn't just help the people you're kind to. It changes everything it touches." They saw what compassion could build. They saw that cooperation created something stronger than conquest ever could. And some of them started to wonder if maybe there was a better way. She smiled, thinking of all the years, all the battles, all the friendships and losses and triumphs that had brought them to this moment. Samuel gave one speech 300 years ago. He never knew what it would become. But because of him, because of the choice humanity made that day, the entire galaxy is different. Entire species exist who might have been destroyed. Civilizations flourish that might have fallen. And somewhere out there, right now, someone is learning that kindness matters. Someone is deciding to help a stranger. Someone is choosing mercy over cruelty. She looked up at the stars one more time. That's the gift, not the alliances or the trade agreements or the military protection. The gift is proving that compassion works, proving that kindness creates more than cruelty ever could, proving that the choice to help others is never, ever wasted. Stood and helped her grandmother to her feet. Together, they walked back toward the house, leaving the garden and the ocean and the stars behind. But the stars kept shining, and across the galaxy, the story kept being told. The story of a young diplomat who spoke for strangers. The story of refugees who never forgot a kindness. The story of a species that chose mercy when it was difficult, and found that the universe returned the favor in ways no one could have imagined. The story of humanity. And it was only beginning.